This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 30 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Engaging Experts. I'm your host, Noah Balmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Professor Anna Kirkland to the show. Professor Kirkland is the Kim Lane Scheppele Collegiate Professor of Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Michigan. She is a published author, and her research focuses on the relationship between health and law, health insurance coverage for infertility, and the politics of health. Professor Kirkland holds a JD and a PhD in Jurisprudence and Social Policy from UC Berkeley. Professor Kirkland, thank you so much for joining me here today on Engaging Experts.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, let's jump into it. So you've made a career in academia for, over 20 years. Tell me about your recent involvement in expert witnessing. How'd you get there?
Well, I've only been an expert witness twice, separated in time by a number of years and on totally different topics. So I was really a newbie kind of both times for different reasons. And I'm not totally sure how anyone found me, although the first time some years ago, it seemed like they wanted a Michigan expert to talk about the Michigan same-sex marriage litigation. There was some elements of that they wanted an expert for. And so I think, going to the state flagship was, they were looking for somebody a little more local, and that I was new was not an impediment. And in the second case, I happen to have some original research that was really relevant in the area, research and data that's kind of tricky to get. So I could see that I was really the person that had this research that they needed.
So I don't know about you, but when I went to law school, we learned about expert witnesses kind of academically, but not what it's like to be one. So how did your education match your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, I'm interested in the topic of expertise as a researcher, who gets to be an expert, what that looks like, how to, and so then to be in this position was really fascinating and, and somewhat intimidating, because as we can explore, it's pretty different types of expertise that, from what you develop in academia and then what it is being a witness. And so yeah, it was a multi-layered experience. You're trying to be a thing that you've also reflected on and critiqued, and and then there's the what did I write 10 years ago that might come back? So there's a lot to process.
So as an academic, tell me what it means to you to be an expert.
I mean, in academia, the main way we think about that is you have produced original research in an area that is pretty finely focused. Like when we think about our own expertise, we're really getting in the weeds. Am I one of the top people in this particular area, which to anyone else would sound like a very, very small little area. So we think of ourselves, we think of our expertise as fairly narrowly focused and really around, what research did we ourselves do and produce and touch, and for expert witnessing, one thing I learned was that my expertise was much broader than that. That it included things that I would feel comfortable lecturing about to undergraduates and teaching about, and and lots of times we're reading and teaching about just the secondary literature that we know very well, but we don't think of that as my expertise. That's just, I just know about what the conclusions are in this field. And a lot of us know about the research conclusions in multiple fields that we don't consider ourselves, to be experts in. But, that was a big thing that I learned, is sort of where the boundaries are drawn of what your expertise is. It varies by academic field. And then that seemed really different to the attorneys that I spoke to. They thought I was an expert in a lot more things than I would have claimed to be an expert in necessarily.
Sure. Do you think that it is important for potential expert witnesses to have kind of a well-defined niche?
Yeah, I thought about that coming into this, and I was thinking about, if you're in a very well-defined disciplinary field, and you have, I've been running a lab studying this particular thing for decades, That's great. That's going to be a very clear, precise boundary around that. But I really think just attorneys could think about interdisciplinary scholars as maybe having a kind of range that maybe they would really need. Like in the first case that I worked on, they really needed someone who could talk about, the application of the legal standard of strict scrutiny and how that had evolved and how that matched political outcomes. So, like, what sorts of representation and political wins had different groups like African Americans and women achieved at the time historically that they got a heightened level of scrutiny applied and equal protection. So it really was an interdisciplinary legal studies question. I was like, oh yes, you're asking me to talk about political science and what we know from, studies of ballot initiative outcomes. And, at the same time as you need me to understand where the law was at a particular time and blend that story up together. And then, so I went from thinking like, oh, I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. They had sort of fancier experts in other parts of the national litigation going on. And then I thought, well, you need a Michigan person and you need someone who can pull all this together. And I was like, okay, actually, I think I can do this. Um, so interdisciplinary scholars, people in, I'm in women's and gender studies, but there's a lot of different newer, more interdisciplinary fields where people, if someone is looking for an expert with a bit of range or in something a little bit new, that could be a great place to look.
Now that's really interesting because you are in quite a dynamic field, or at least the political application is quite dynamic right now. How do you stay abreast of everything? How do you not only be an expert, but maintain that expertise in the changing political environment?
I mean, this is something I've really been confronting recently because it's just, I feel really pretty overwhelmed at the moment trying to keep up with things. And it does ebb and flow over the years. Like I just finished a book on healthcare civil rights, so I've been really focused on that. My book on the Vaccine Injury Compensation Court came out in 2016, so I'm a little bit more behind in that. But now I'm catching up on a lot of research there and trying to, because there are going to be a lot of things that are coming down the pike with that. So it's always a matter of trying to sort of read what's going on. When is what I might be able to bring going to be helpful or necessary? Is there a bit of a lull in scholarship? Sometimes things are moving a little bit slower and there's an opening. So I try to, be there when I think there's going to be an opening and anticipate that. And maybe let an area of my expertise kind of go a little bit into the background. But then sometimes a reporter will just call me and then I accept the interview, put it off for a few hours, and then, frantically research it in the meantime. So it is hard to try to keep up with all of the things that we try to keep up with. And sometimes you just have to prioritize because it's too much.
With a lot of academic expertise, as you say, there's a lot of publication. There's writing books, there's publishing in journals. A lot of that is paywalled and not super easily searchable. So what are the strategies that attorneys, and somebody with a JD yourself, what are the strategies that attorneys should be doing to locate people in these kind of niche, kind of nebulous fields when a lot of their work isn't immediately available?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, and it really is a shame that a lot of our work is behind paywalls. If you find a person and you would like their scholarship, anyone can just email us and ask us to send them their copies of our papers, and we will do that. We're not prohibited by our copyright agreements from sharing our own copies with anyone who asks.
Oh,
So,
interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah, so I can send a PDF as an individual, if someone wants to read my paper, I could certainly do that. So that's one way but you have to have found that person already.
Sure.
And then you're sort of in faculty web pages or Google Scholar and then you can't really get behind the paywall. But some people will have personal websites, or you can tell enough from the faculty website. Conference proceedings, conference bulletins are often published. The primary, the American Political Science Association will publish their, just who gave a talk and what the title of the talk was. And, sometimes that perusing those could be a good way to find, then Google the person and then email the person. but yeah, that's a little tedious.
Let's back up to those first couple of phone calls. How did those go? Like, walk me through a phone call with an engaging attorney. What are the things that they ask? How do they vet you? And how do you vet them back to decide whether or not it's a an engagement that you want to accept?
It started with an email, I guess. Would you be interested in this? And, when it's like, wow, one of the more interesting emails you're going to get, right? This is new and different. And yeah, just what I always would want to know, what exactly do you want from me? And can I give this? Is it something I can do? Does my expertise match? What exactly do you want? And, when do you want it? Because we should talk a little bit about the academic scheduling versus attorney scheduling, and it's just the way that sometimes the academic work deadline approaches doesn't match very well with what attorneys need. So, for the main conversation would be about, what exactly do you need, and can I conceivably do this, and am I a good fit for this? And what's your deadline?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, counselor, you've opened the door to scheduling, so let's talk about scheduling a little bit. What do you do to maintain? Obviously, as an academic, you've got courses, you've got research, you've got publication, you've got a lot of things going on, a lot of plates spinning, and then somebody calls you and says, I don't know how many hours it's going to take. It might go to a deposition, it might be settled tomorrow. I don't know. How do you handle accepting an engagement and making sure that you have enough time to give that engagement everything that it requires?
Yeah, I mean, both times this was a significant challenge. And when I was thinking about doing this, I was thinking back in my schedule, and what happened is I just ended up taking vacation time and, working through holidays that had otherwise planned to relax in, and just making time at night, you know, just forcing the time in my schedule where I had it. And I was lucky that I had some breaks, because academics, we do have, like, I had the winter break for one of these, which I might have otherwise spent relaxing, and I spent on this. um, but in academia, the big difference, well, one difference in our jobs is we're doing a lot of different stuff all the time, but the actual deadlines are not drop dead deadlines. It's not like we have to turn this into the judge at this time. It's, oh, the journal would like my review on this date. But like anytime 2 weeks later is also fine. So academics have this very flexible sense, like, yeah, that's the deadline. But there are not that many deadlines for us that are really, really monitored as much as attorneys. So we're kind of always managing the ebb and flow. But that is something attorneys should be aware of, is that sometimes academics have fairly flexible chunks of time, but there are some times where, we've just gotten 100 papers to grade, or our book deadline from the publisher is there, or we're just swamped with other things. So it is harder to manage that.
Absolutely. So you've done an expert witness report. Tell me about how that went. Did the attorney advise you on format, or did they give you some kind of a template?
I didn't get a template. I sort of, they explained what it should look like, and then I worked up a draft, and then, they gave some feedback. One of them, I've done two, and one was, looking back on it, they wanted it sort of in numbered paragraphs, like sort of very discreetly written. And then the other one was sort of a report, just that I just wrote it, in my own voice and format.
Sure.
So yeah.
How is the writing versus, academic writing versus writing an expert report? Is it any different?
Yeah, it was, writing the report, I was trying to be sort of flatter and more just plainly descriptive, nothing fancy, no, the tone is very sort of matter of fact. Whereas then sometimes in our scholarship, maybe we're a little polemical, or we're making an argument, or we're, trying to make it a little more interesting. But I did get the message that that's not what we want here. Just, go through um, the presentation of your opinion. But one contrast is, in our academic work, we don't necessarily think of ourselves as first and foremost just giving our opinion, right? We're we're doing a whole bunch of other things, and it's not just, give your opinion to the judge. So it was a little bit flatter, a little bit with a little bit of the voice taken out.
Sure, sure. Well,
Um,
it has to be tailored for laypersons, right?
yeah, yeah. And there's, nothing, no flowery sentences, no jargon, no just opinion, straightforward opinions, nothing too inflammatory.
Absolutely. So you have not undergone the deposition process or the trial process. What is your impressions of going to deposition and being questioned for hours on end? Do you feel that you would be ready should that occur? Have your engaging attorneys started that preparation for you at all?
I was deposed once.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep, I did go through a few hours of deposition in the second case that I was a witness for, but it didn't go any further than that.
How did that deposition go?
I mean, it was really interesting. It was it was a lot. I mean, academics are used to being challenged and having to defend our work, except it happens in the peer review process where you send it off in paper and then 3 months later you get some comments and then you have a few weeks to respond, right? Everything moves very slowly. It's all in writing. And so, having to just answer a whole series of pretty specific questions is not how we roll at all. You know.
Right, right. Well, it's different. How does that process compare with, say, the peer review process?
I mean, in the peer review process, where often the person is, accepts our account of things and has a bunch of questions, has some doubts. Sometimes peer review can be very aggressive and very unpleasant, but
Hmm.
generally it's not. Generally, they're saying, well, I would really like to see more discussion of this, or I would, you're trying to figure out how to please them and work with what the peer reviewer wants without making your paper seem in the end too weird or, having too many voices in it or something like that. But at its best, it's very collaborative. It's not necessarily adversarial and it's not sort of point by point.
Oh, that's interesting.
What helped me in the deposition was just to keep focused on the report, narrow the focus to the exact conclusions and observations and data that I had presented in the report. And I knew that we had done a good job in our study and our research, and I knew that data better than anyone. And just trying to keep it focused in that. Um, Now the opposing attorney, who was very good, did pull out a sentence from one of my papers that I had published 10 years ago. Um, Dr. Kirkland, do you stand by this sentence? And I was like, well, let me pause. Let's look it up. Let's see what did you find? um, and the attorneys had coached me just to not to respond quickly, to consult the report or think through. And that's what I did. I went back and, well, let me take a minute and look it up. Let me make sure I know exactly what you're referring to. And it was fine, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't expecting that necessarily.
So it's interesting you say the peer review process isn't necessarily as adversarial. Do they ever try and impeach you during the peer review process as they would during something like a deposition or a Dobert hearing? Do they ever try and impeach your credibility as an expert at all?
Not really. No.
Okay. Let's talk about trials. Obviously, you've done deposition. You haven't been in a jury trial, and a lot of people haven't because so many are going to are not getting to the trial process for one reason or another. Usually because they go towards settlement. Do you feel that you would be properly prepared for a jury trial? Have you been given any preparation techniques or anything like that for a jury trial?
No, and I would definitely need some preparation. One thing I'll say though is that undergraduate teaching is a really good way to just have to explain yourself to people
Right,
relatively
right.
clearly. And, folks should remember we get anonymous reviews from a bunch of 18 and 20-year-olds every semester. And you want to talk about brutal reviews. Some of those can be pretty tough. So people who teach undergraduates, get continual feedback from them about whether you're being clear enough and whether your explanations are good. And if you talk too much or not enough, or aren't clear enough. So that is one thing with professors, is we have been through the ringer a lot on that. And so I think that is one strength that one might bring, is being able to craft an explanation that a jury might be able to understand, because you've had to do it to a bunch of 18-year-olds who didn't always do the reading, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. So because you have done a deposition, I get to ask you one of my favorite questions, which is, do you have any pre-deposition or pre-trial kind of ritual, something that you do to get yourself ready to go? I've had people who say, I don't eat anything. People who say, I need a huge breakfast and a nap. And I have, and everything in between. I have people who meditate. Is there anything that gets you ready to go into that sort of tense situation?
Oh gosh. I just drink. I'll tell you, I drank some coffee, banished the family from the basement, because this was COVID. I had other people in the house, and so I had to, just to be able to concentrate generally in COVID, I had set up a whole alternate workstation in my basement. And so, as I was thinking, how will I be able to do this in a way that I can focus?
Sure.
But yeah, I didn't, besides reviewing all my materials and making sure I was adequately caffeinated, I don't. Which
Adequate
might not have
caffeination is
totally
important.
helped. I probably needed to come down rather than up, but
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we wrap up, do you have any final advice for academic professionals that are interested in getting into expert witnessing, or attorneys who are seeking academic professionals as expert witnesses?
oh gosh, I think I've hit a lot of the main things, which is just to think about your expertise differently, and for attorneys, to coach professors, knowing that they probably think about their expertise pretty differently than the attorney does. And people may have different levels of confidence, where they are in the academic hierarchy, and going down a little bit in the academic hierarchy will still get you a great expert witness, but that person may not be quite as used to having that bully pulpit. But that may be the person who has the expertise that you need.
Sage advice. Professor Kirkland, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another episode of Engaging Experts. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Engaging Experts. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com.